Obviously, as Scarlett mentioned in the introduction, you're sort of been well known in recent years for your comments about China. President Trump himself has made many comments about China on the campaign trail and now in the administration. What do you see?
They've been a little bit different.
Right. Once again, one of these things may be a little different than what people expected. But what do you see sort of emerging potentially in that relationship? And does it change in any way the way you see things playing out there?
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about the administration, right? I mean, China was the boogeyman in 2016 in the campaign. And, following one visit to Mar-a-Lago, the president and Xi Jinping seem to be best buddies. And so this is, I think, one of the things that has caused most of us that are watching sort of geopolitics. And remember, we're stock guys. We're not macro people. I'll make that disclosure and caveat, as I always do. This policy could change tomorrow. I mean, and I think that that's something that has a lot of people, a little bit uncertain in that you had this currency manipulator, you had trade problems, and this is an administration that is focused on trade. And now all of a sudden, China is our best friend in the Western Pacific. So I don't know. I think, clearly people are focused on North Korea, as they should be. But the South China Sea is still being developed militarily by China. You have the Chinese currency stabilizing post Mar-a-Lago, which I think probably is a good thing. But we'll have to see. I mean, this is an administration which seems to sort of make it up as it goes along. So what their policy is going to be 6 months or a year from now, I have no idea.
So that means we can't safely say the threat of a trade war with China has been removed?
Well, I don't know that a trade war with China. I mean, I think anything that will bring tariffs is kind of a dumb idea. And I'm a free trade guy, but I think that'll extend well beyond China. I mean, that will extend to our partners in North America, Europe. I mean, we seem to be picking lots of fights these days. So, China seems to be one we're not picking, but we seem to be, concerning a lot of trade partners everywhere else in the world. A general rise in tariffs and a general drop in global trade would have to be bad news, I think.
Speaking of the domestic situation in China, it appears that the regulators and the government there are embarking some sort of deleveraging campaign, perhaps recognizing that there's a lot of bad debt in the banks and
maybe they've been listening to you.
Perhaps some structural issues. How does what does that do for your thesis? What do you sense? What do you make of that?
Yeah, only in China would growth in banking assets of 15%, twice the GDP. Last year be considered deleveraging.
It's all relative.
And steel production is still rising 5% a year, something like that. So China, when China says deleveraging or supply side reform, we're going to cut capacity. They've been saying these things now as long as I've been following China, which is over 7 years. And when you then look at the numbers, and remember we're comparing bad apples to bad apples, I admit that, there's still substantial growth in credit and capacity, and all the things that they claim they're trying to rein in doesn't happen. And in particular, when you've got bank credit, banking assets, forgetting the shadow banking system for a second, still growing 2 to 3x GDP, the model is every bit the same model that I've been worrying about for years, which is it is just a debt-driven model. And last year, we think they added about $5 trillion or so in new credit dollars, in new credit to the system, which is somewhere between 40 and 50% of GDP. And I keep saying, I dare say, if the U.S. economy added 8 or 9 trillion in new credit, we'd be growing at 5 or 6% too. There's not a lot to that. So people always ask me, do you believe the numbers in China? And I said, well, when it comes to GDP, I kind of sort of do. And that's the problem, is that they're basically, given the model, you just stick a shovel in the ground, borrow money, and put up another building, it will add to GDP.